It's 3:05. I'd like to call this meeting of the JMRL Board of Trustees to order. We'll be operating under the resolution that adopted procedures for public meetings during an emergency that was first introduced to the board on the May 18th meeting, if anyone wants to check that. The first order of business is for us to look at the minutes from the last meeting. I assume everyone has read them. Are there any concerns, comments before we vote on whether to accept these minutes or not? I'm taking that as no concerns. We can do this as an A or nay. If everyone who would approve this would say aye.
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 Are there any people who would object?
I would abstain because I wasn't there.
Thank you, Tony. Are there any announcements from board members before the meeting begins?
I have a comment that I had the opportunity to visit Nelson Library for appointment service a couple weeks ago. And I just wanted to mention how impressed I was with the renovation. And it's just such a beautiful gem, the way it helped that I was there on a really nice weather day, but there's so many more windows and natural light and so much more space. And I think the new meeting rooms in particular are going to be a very popular service or facility. They're sort of similar to what we have at Northside. And so just compliments to everyone involved in the renovation and their expansion work. The results are really fantastic. So I can't wait for all the rest of you to have an opportunity to get there, or for us to have a meeting there one day in the future. But great work to everyone. I was very, very impressed with the facility.
That's good to hear. I know our patrons who've been able to get into the library have been really happy with it. Are there any other announcements from board members? Are there any comments from anyone in the public who's attending this meeting?
If you could raise your hand if you're an attendee and you'd like to speak, I can allow you to speak. Looks like no takers.
Thank you. The first item of business, very briefly, will be the trustee continuing education. David is going to briefly discuss and introduce the committees, the staff committees. You've got all of that information in the handouts for this month's meeting. David.
Right, briefly. There are quite a few committees here, and actually this was a very useful exercise for me. Recently, JMRL had our first virtual new staff orientation, and we go through this. Krista presents this information to new staff, and staff asked if we could add a slight description to each committee as well for new staff. So now we'll have that based on this CE. So what I'm going to do is give a brief description of each committee and then tell you what the membership basis is, what the frequency of meetings are, and who the chair is for each one. Also, some of these names that are on the intranet listing I shared with you need to be updated. So there's some work that needs to be done here. So again, a useful exercise. I will share the intranet page. As a reminder, all JMRL trustees have access to the staff intranet. There's lots of useful information there. It is password protected, so reach out to me if you no longer have those credentials. Let's start with the Adult Services Committee. This is a staff committee focusing on adult services, collections, and programming for JMRL. Generally, we're trying to get one representative from each branch, and anyone responsible for adult services at JMRL meets roughly 3 times a year to discuss and coordinate adult programs and services, along with seasonal programming scheduled for adults. So it tackles the concerns for programming services and the collection and general services for that age group, deals with logistical issues as well, tries to take a regional view for offerings for adults, so all JMRL offerings for adults. The membership here is automatic if you're an adult services employee. The frequency is quarterly, really, but when I say quarterly for the rest of this, roughly it means seasonally 3 to 4 times a year. And the chair is the Adult and Reference Services Manager. This is a job requirement. That position is automatically the chair of the Adult Services Committee. Children's Committee is a similar committee, but it's focusing on children's services. So it's made up of each individual at JMRL who provides children's services. It's automatic, the membership, although not all can attend each meeting because of coverage issues at branches. It tackles programs, services, collections, and concerns for the age group, tries to take a regional view of offerings for children's, has shifted to virtual meetings, as all of these committees have during the pandemic. So the membership here is automatic, the frequency is monthly, and the chair is the Children's Services Coordinator. Again, that's part of their job description. The Children's Services Coordinator has to be the chair of the Circulation Committee. I'm sorry, of the Children's Committee. Next up, Circulation Committee, made up of staff that work frontline circulation at JMRL. They discuss issues related to procedure, and they recommend circulation service adjustments to the JMRL administration. Membership to this is volunteer, meets quarterly, and the chair is the circulation manager for JMRL. Again, that's a job requirement, so the circulation manager has to chair this committee. Next is the compensation committee, which Krista went into much detail about last month, so I won't go too deeply into it. It was formed to create JMRL's compensation and evaluation plan and exists in its current setup to update that and to vet manager recommendations for staffing changes to be passed on to JMRL admin. Future work will include a review of JMRL's compensation plan with an eye towards a possible replacement. It's a 5-year plan goal. Membership is by appointment. Frequency is quarterly, and the chair is Krista Farrell, and the chair rotates. So that's not a job requirement of Krista's. Customer Service Committee is one of the 3 new committees formed in fiscal year 20. It's chaired by JMRL's Circulation Manager currently. The goal is to take a holistic approach to JMRL's customer service, attempt to standardize where possible, and look for ways to improve customer service system-wide. They've been asked to look at the frequent customer service issues that frontline staff run into, or all staff, and determine if there are any procedural or policy changes JMRL should make in order to improve those experiences for patrons. They look at JMRL policies and procedures to find areas that might run contrary to JMRL's customer service philosophy, try to come up with solutions. Currently, they're looking at institutional cards, which is cards available for organizations like schools, daycare centers, etc. And they've been working on the customer service statement, which is on your agenda later today. Membership was by application and then appointment. The frequency is quarterly, and the chair is currently the circulation manager. That is a job requirement as well. Emergency Planning Committee. Okay, so as an earlier 5-year plan goal of JMRL's, there was the creation of this committee to work as a partner in community emergencies, whether pandemic, certainly currently, the August 12th a few years ago, had additional members besides just JMRL. So UVA librarian Dan Wilson, representative from the UVA Charlottesville Albemarle EOC. Until the pandemic, that person has not had the time for this then. And also there was a job change there. We used to have a safety and security committee at JMRL that was a separate entity that was chaired by JMRL's business manager. Those got rolled together after the retirement of the previous business manager. Of course, post-pandemic, the EPC has been singularly focused on JMRL's COVID response plan. I've joined as an ad hoc committee member. Peter Mano from the Friends of the Library has joined to help coordinate services. Pre-pandemic, the committee worked on JMRL's emergency prep handbook. Currently, the only focus is on COVID response. So the membership is by appointment. Pre-pandemic, the frequency was quarterly. Currently, it's bi-weekly or more frequently as needed. The chair is the assistant library director, and that is a job requirement. JMRL Staff Equity Committee is another of the 3 new committees from last fiscal year. It's co-chaired by JMRL's Louisa Branch Manager and JMRL's Adult and Reference Service Manager. Representation is meant to cross branches and positions. Purpose is, again, to identify barriers to access in policy and procedure, make recommendations for new and adapted policies and procedures, work on new equity core competencies for all staff, suggest trainings and readings, and provide practical tips for staff to promote an equitable, diverse, and inclusive environment at all JMRL locations. It's meant to be both inward and outward facing, so making JMRL an equitable and inclusive place to work and an equitable and inclusive place for the public. This committee will be working on a draft anti-racism policy for JMRL in 2021. Membership is by application and then appointment. Frequency is quarterly, and the chairs are, as I mentioned, Ophelia Payne and Sarah Hamfeld. Those are rotating. It's not lifetime appointment. Goodwill Committee was formed to promote JMRL services and perform outreach. Early projects included an adopt-a-library for St. Bernard Parish, Louisiana, after Hurricane Katrina. That was in partnership with the Friends of the Library. The group was interested in the time at holding a community reading event, partnered with the Virginia Center for the Book on the Big Read, and has since been planning and pulling off the same page community reading event annually. And that's the main goal of the Goodwill Committee these days. Membership is volunteer. The frequency is as needed. The current chair is Abby Cox from the reference department. That is a rotating position. Poem in Your Pocket Day Committee was formed to plan and distribute poems annually on this day, specific to this goal. This year, again, we're looking at some sort of virtual version of this event like last year. Membership is volunteer. The frequency of meetings is as needed. And the current chairs are Tim Carrier and Brittany Eversberg, and that's a rotating chair. Programming Committee. This is the broadest of all the committees that touch on programming. So that includes Adult Services Committee, Young Adult Services Committee, and Children's Committee. Membership is meant to reflect big and small branches, teens, children's, and adults, to look holistically at offerings for all three age levels. We want to make sure that JMRL is offering things for all age groups, coordinating regional efforts among those. This group analyzes data and works on the data input. So JMRL's program reporting form came out of this committee, as did the program partnership form. This committee was a goal of JMRL's 2014 through 2019 strategic plan. Membership is by appointment. They meet quarterly, and the Adult and Reference Services Manager is the chair by requirement. Social Media Committee. How to best and most efficiently to implement social media strategies across the whole system. It meets basically quarterly, in late winter, a few times in the spring. Oh, I'm sorry, I skipped one. The Summer Reading Program Committee. I was reading you the description for summer reading. Because summer reading is our biggest program, it gets its own committee. How best and effectively to implement this program across the system, meets effectively quarterly. Came up with the big overhaul to the state's program. JMRL used the state's offering when they moved to a virtual offering a few years ago, but didn't quite work with our needs. So this committee charted changes and created a new summer reading program for all three age groups of service. Membership is by appointment. It meets quarterly. The chair currently is Tim Carrier, and that's a rotating chair. Now Social Media Committee, sorry. Works on procedures for JMRL social media, schedules and organized posting to maximize branch exposure in a unified social media setting. Membership is volunteer. The frequency is quarterly. And the chair is the public relations specialist. That's a job requirement. Just a few more. The Technology Advisory Committee was created as per a goal of the 2004 through 2009 strategic plan. The goal was to empower staff to oversee policy regarding use of technology throughout JMRL. Basically looking to get some regional standardization of technological offerings. The main goal now is to work on the technology plan that gets incorporated into JMRL's strategic plan. The membership is volunteer, the frequency is as needed, and the chair is JMRL's Technology and Collections Manager, and that's a job requirement. The Training Committee is the last of the three new JMRL committees from last fiscal year. It's designed to standardize training offerings throughout the regional system. Really, currently it's made up of three subcommittees that meet regularly, then report back as a whole to the whole group. There is the In-Service Day Subcommittee, which used to be a committee of its own and now has been absorbed by the Training Committee. The Training Plan Subcommittee and the Cross-Training Subcommittee. The membership was by application, then appointment. Frequency is quarterly. The chair is currently Haley Tompkins, and that's a rotating position. Almost done. The Web Committee was initially formed to provide input to the consultants who designed the current JMRL webpage. Now it's a feedback network for JMRL's digital service coordinator to suggest initiatives and changes to the website. They've worked hard on the current beta version of JMRL's website. Membership is volunteer. Frequency is as needed, and the chair is the digital services coordinator. Currently, that's by job requirement. Prior to that, the position didn't exist, so it was a rotating position. And finally, Young Adult Services Committee is made up of each individual at JMRL who provides young adult services, so it's automatic membership. Although, again, not everyone can attend each meeting for coverage issues at their local branches. Tackles programs, services, collections, and concerns for the entire age group. Takes a regional view of offerings for teens. Actually, this group pioneered digital attendance for JMRL at committee meetings. It was pre-pandemic because folks were having a hard time getting away from branches in order to make the trek to a centralized location. This was the first committee to use virtual meetings. Membership is automatic. The frequency is monthly during the school year, and the chair is the Young Adult Services Coordinator, and that is a job requirement. Okay, that was as quick as I could make it. But what questions do you all have about JMRL staff committees?
They do look as if they may need to be updated a little bit. I noticed a few names that were missing and a few names that I didn't recognize anymore.
Yeah.
Whose job is that, David?
That we'll find out. We'll find a committee to find that job. No, I have collected that information as part of preparing for the CE, and I'll pass it over to Catherine to fix.
Okay, great. It would be helpful if she would send it around to us just in case people aren't taking the time to go to the staff intranet.
Sure, can do that.
So that we know who's there.
David, just out of curiosity, do you have any sense of what portion of the overall staff participate in a committee?
Not off the top of my head, Thomas. That's a great question. I can find that out and send it back out to you. I know that there are some names here quite a few times, but because of the Children's, Young Adult, and Adult Services Committee, there's a fairly broad representation for those three.
Yeah.
Circulation, we would love it to be larger, but it just becomes untenable at that point.
Sure. Yeah, just no rush, but yeah, just a little curious about that.
Yeah, me too. I'll send that out.
Thank you.
David, I found those descriptions to be very helpful. So if you're sending something back up by email, could you have those as part of it?
Sure.
Or it sounds like you're going to update.
They'll be on the website, maybe not that level of detail,
Yeah.
but I can send out what we have.
Are there any other questions from trustees or comments? I think that was really useful, David. And when we get the updated information, I hope everyone will look at it, see if they recognize the faces that they would see when they go into their local branches. And also give David any feedback if you're hearing any things that may be helpful in terms of trickling down to committees. I think that's probably the appropriate way to get that information through. Is that right, David?
So you're saying if folks would like to...
If they would like to make a comment relative to the work that's being done in any of the committees, it should go through you.
Yeah, absolutely. That's the appropriate way to do that.
Okay, good. Good, thank you. Now, before we get into the rest of the business of the meeting, we have a really nice piece of new business, and that's to welcome Tony Townsend, bless his heart, back to the board. Tony was on the Board of Trustees from 2003 to 2011 and served as president for 2 years? Yeah, that's what I thought, 2 years. After that, he was on the Friends of the Library Board as well and served as president there. So for those of you who may not have met Tony, he really has a deep experience in the library, and I think it's going to be a tremendous strength for us to have him back on the board. And I'm very grateful that he's doing that. Just to give you a little background on Tony so you get to know him if you don't already. He's a security analyst for IT at University of Virginia and has been in that position for quite some time now, I think, which is also another heavy load to bear these days. He also teaches at the Open Doors program in the Albemarle County Schools for adult education, particularly with regard to computers. And he does freelance computer work. So if anybody needs some good education on computer literacy, Tony would be a great person to contact about that. I asked him what he did in his spare time. I'm not sure he has very much of that, but he says he really enjoys photography. But the thing that interested me was to learn that he is the webmaster and has been for 20 years now for the Patrick O'Brien Compendium. The author, Patrick O'Brien. If anybody doesn't know him, look him up at Tony's website, the Patrick O'Brien Compendium, and learn a little bit about a very popular adult author. So welcome, Tony. We're really glad to have you. And I hope that we'll have a chance, each of us, to get to know you personally before too long.
Thank you, Marcy. It's great to be back. Thank you, everybody.
Thanks. Okay, committee reports. We had a policy committee meeting today, so Mike will present the report from that meeting.
Okay, there are 3 points that we covered, or 3 items we covered today. The first was a review of a final draft of the gifts to the library policy. And we do have, the committee does have a final draft to present to the board. I think we can, it's the same version. There were no further edits from the version that was included in the handout packet for this meeting. But David, maybe we can screen share it briefly. And by doing that, we can accomplish a reading of the policy for today. And that way we can have that as an agenda item to vote and adopt for the next board meeting. I don't know, does anyone feel that I should read it now, given that we had it in the packet? I'm happy to read it if we feel that's useful. Otherwise, I'll open the floor for a discussion of this. Again, it'll be, we'll propose it, you know, unless there's any tweaks or wordsmithing today, we'll propose a version for a vote next month.
What you might want.
I had a question.
Yeah.
Oh.
Well, before that, Lisa, Mike, what
Yes.
you might want to do is just briefly give us an update on the reason for the changes that have been proposed.
Okay, great. Yeah, I think it's a great point. So we had a good discussion in October where we got some items on the table and then sort of got those into shape for the committee to look at final language today. But the idea is that the library receives unsolicited gifts on a kind of a regular basis, and those go from small to large. And the first point of handling for those is the director, and the director in turn, I think has delegated that for certain, you know, $20 type of smaller gifts of money are usually by director initiated procedure, are just I think are usually applied to a buy a book sort of fund. And then for larger gifts, particularly of money, the director has the discretion then to bring those to the Board of Trustees for a board approval. And that essentially was already the practice, I suppose, but it's maybe written down a little more in a little more detail here. The next main point that we kind of uncovered was the idea that some gifts, especially to branches, if you think of gifts of artwork or plaques or so forth, sometimes come with restrictions or sort of an agreement with the donor. And we wanted to add that those kind of need to be acknowledged in writing so that we have sort of a control or a way to remember those, because if you can imagine, you know, time passes and what we all know today, our successors 10 years from now, you know, may have different memories or recollections. So that's the next thing that got added. And then separately, we identified the idea that some gifts are that JMRL or entities working on behalf of JMRL sometimes solicit gifts. So we wanted to just add a paragraph to cover that. And there's some good reasons why those should be sort of, we should have a control or a consolidated way of kind of knowing about all those. So we've asked that those go through the director. That is sort of binding on staff, but external friends or fundraising organizations, we're just trying to write down here our indication. We can't dictate to the friends how they operate, but we're sort of expressing our preference here for how they go through the director for gifts that they're soliciting on behalf of the library.
Lisa, was it a question that you had?
I did have that question, but this contextualization from Mike has totally answered those questions. So that was a good call, Marcy. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, other thoughts or questions on gifts of non-library materials? Okay, the second thing that today's meeting involved was visiting the conduct in JMRL policy. Some branch managers had wanted us to look at a couple of particular items here. Today's discussion was just, again, sort of getting things on the table, and we'll have a draft for the next policy committee meeting, which is right now scheduled for February. And at that, hopefully after that, we'll be able to bring language to the board. One thing we identified that I'll just point out is we looked at some other, or at least skimmed, fair to say, some other conduct policies from around the state. David had asked in the State Library Directors Forum for some of peer libraries' favorites. And one goal we have is to just maybe say some of the same things that our current policy has, but I think we can rework the tone to be sort of a positive approach rather than a sort of a restrictive or a punitive type of tone. And we can get the same point across in a more friendly way. So that's one goal that we'll look for the next language. And then the final item from today was just continuing our process of working towards a dedicated JMRL personnel manual. Previously, we had sort of validated or discussed this approach with Charlottesville, City of Charlottesville HR, who sort of is our base HR facility, but they confirmed or validated that it was appropriate for city departments to supplement sort of the base manual with department-specific procedures. What David and I had done for this month was look at other public library personnel manuals, and we discussed those with the state of Virginia, with the public library consultant, to say, hey, are these good examples that have proper scope and are covering the right sorts of things and aren't over covering things that should be handled in procedure? And the public library consultant said, yes, these were good examples of what she used the phrase clean manuals. So we have sort of a baseline example set to work from. So our next step is that we've convened a working group that will, see, these are policies that, well, the working group will first, by looking at other example manuals, identify areas that we don't have covered in terms of personnel policy. And then, usually when we're reviewing policies, we're looking at existing policies so that we have something to start with. But the working committee, this working group will identify things where we need coverage and then work towards getting some drafts in place that would then go to the policy committee for discussion as if they were, existing policies being reviewed. And then eventually that'll come to the full board for approval like any other policy. Myself and Tony Townsend have volunteered to be on that working group from the trustee level. If there are other trustees who are particularly interested, certainly let me know and we'll get you included. David is going to come up with a representative, small but representative group of library staff, and we'll all work together to come up with the right things. Any comments or questions there, or on any topic of policy committee? All right, thank you.
Thanks, Mike. Next, we'll deal with old business. And David, I'm just going to let you rip through this because I think you're on the hot seat for all of it.
Yeah.
We'll start out with an update on the response, on the COVID response.
Okay, I'm going to share with you some numbers that I shared with JMRL staff last week. So these are the right before Christmas out of date. And then I will email these around to you as I did Wendy's request last month as well. But just to give you a picture, what I told staff was that sometimes it's hard. We're also kind of in little silos and isolated and working with our face, 6 inches in front of us these days, that it's hard to see the big picture. But the level of service that JMRL has been able to provide in tiers 5, 4, and now 3 is it's really pretty broad, and we're happy to be able to offer this much service. So I'll give you some numbers. Since July 1, so at the beginning of the new fiscal year, JMRL has put on 295 virtual programs that have been attended by 5,333 people. Circulation for JMRL materials since July 1 through the end of November, that's kind of the last report we had, 424,677 items. 122,344 of those have been digital, which is a 43% growth from the digital materials last year. And of course, makes sense because people are getting them at home. 19,323 new items have been ordered, cataloged, and processed since July 1 through the end of November. Since the pandemic began, a little over 42,000 people have signed on to use JMRL Wi-Fi. 42,000 people. JMRL has made 2,665 new library cards since the pandemic began. 2,452 of those were virtual. So only around 200 of them have come since libraries started to transition to Tier 3 in September. All right, this is a lot of numbers, but I promise I'll send you the written version as well. In Tier 3, JMRL has had 2,906 people make appointments. So not all of those have been kept. These numbers are probably a bit high. We have had some no-shows for appointments. So since September and through the 23rd of this month, Central Library has had 66 appointments made. Gordon Avenue has had 39 appointments made. Northside has had 175 appointments made. Crozet 744. Scottsville 38, Nelson 790, Louisa 464, and Green 590. So if you think about those as being in groups of either 1, 3, or 5 at a time in order to keep distances safe, it's really been a lot of work for staff to get there. 309 people have been able to use in-building computer services since September. To sum up with all those numbers, all branches are currently offering Tier 3 service. JMRL is at this point expecting to stay in some form of Tier 3 for quite a while here. I'm expecting we're going to hunker down in this phase with slight tweaks and adjustments to services as we move forward. Likely no changes or tweaks until late January at this point. And then we'll look at capacity and hours again. The EPC is also looking at restrictions on quarantining and gloves for the staff end, but no changes before the end of January at that point. So right now we're all hunkered down in Tier 3 and expecting to stay in Tier 3 for a while and potentially have to roll back to Tier 4 if the current data spike for COVID keeps going the wrong way. But the hope is to stay where we are and safely offer this service. Any questions about that update?
David, are any of the branches experiencing any having to turn away people from appointments in the library?
Yes, Northside is currently having to turn people away from appointments, which we expected at opening up at 5 people per hour. So there are people that, and again, the caveat, not turned away entirely, but not getting their first choice of appointment time. And sometimes not even in that day. It might have to be the next day.
Okay, but in terms of revising the schedule of hours and that sort of thing, you're planning on waiting until the end of January to look at that?
Northside's only been in has only been in Tier 3 for
since the middle of November, right?
Yeah, and we want to see, you know, what the local post-holiday data looks like as well.
Okay.
And is it also true, David, I know for the latest branches to open, we posted that sort of notification, I think on the branch itself and then on the website, but I think we didn't do a lot of active publication of that just because we wanted to, there's no point in publicizing something further than what you have capacity to handle anyhow. Right. But is that still the case?
That's true. We had it was a soft launch of the in-town branches right before the holidays, basically. And we updated our social media feed with the new pinned message about Tier 3 services and updated our web presence, basically. And Northside did some advertisement out of the drive-through window, basically handing out information for folks that were picking up materials. Central has started doing that, and Gordon will soon. So at this point, all branches are in Tier 3, and yeah, even without a press release, we're close to capacity.
Actually, I would consider that handout from the branch window is probably your most, well, you're reaching only current users at that point.
Current users, and at Northside, it's only folks that have transportation to get to the drive-through as well.
Sure, right, but yeah, okay, but I would think that would be pretty effective in
It has been. They are
in driving some level of demand, at least among that subset of users.
But again, you know, as has been reported from the branches that have been in Tier 3 for a while, staff feel that these are that JMRL has worked hard to ensure the best safety protocols that we can, to ensure distancing. Mask compliance is still at 100%, with a few folks having to be told about proper mask use. You know, making sure that it covers nose and mouth. But we haven't had any issues with anybody refusing to wear a mask. Everybody it's been gratifying for staff to see families get into the library and be able to use the resources inside the library.
Do you have any information you could share on health and safety data regarding staff? Have we had any infections on staff since we've moved up?
We have had no staff infections to this point. The closest that we have come is close contact of staff members, and we have had those sporadically throughout. Those are entirely outside of work based, so somebody will have close contact and will need to isolate. But none of those have been driven by either Tier 3 or Tier 4. Again, as I've said all along, Thomas, you know, it's the 5 people in a building is very manageable. My main concern is making sure staff stay vigilant amongst themselves, because they work closely together for a long time. It's easy to slip on some of the protocols, but staff have done an excellent job.
Absolutely. No, I think that's really remarkable. That tells me that staff is taking this very seriously, not just at work, but in their personal lives as well. And I think that that's incredibly commendable. So thank you for sharing.
Are there any other questions for David before he goes on to the next item? Thanks. We've got the customer service statement, David.
Yes, let me cue it up to share. It is in your handout for today on page. I'm trying to pre-scroll so you don't have to watch all the scrolling. Okay. It is on page 8, so the second to last page of your handout for today. Let me share that. And ideally today, the board would make a motion to adopt this statement, or come up with a new version that's acceptable either today or in a path forward. So the original draft that was brought to you last month is at the top here. Serving the patron is JMRL's top priority. Positive library experiences connect JMRL with communities we serve, fostering personal growth and lifelong learning. The board had some great feedback on that, which I brought back to the customer service committee. They convened a working group. I want to thank Wendy Craig especially for coming and contributing to that. So it was staff outside of just the customer service committee and Wendy and myself. And they came up with a new draft trying to encapsulate some of what the board was saying last month about evoking a feeling of joy here. The new draft is: libraries are for everyone. We're pleased to offer you library service with kindness, respect, and understanding. So simple, concise, you can put it behind a service desk, and I think it hits the key points that we want our staff to be kind, show respect for everybody, and have understanding of the individual in front of them.
I'd like to commend you all, because I think this is a great customer service statement. I don't know whether everybody else on the board would agree, but I would certainly feel comfortable voting on this today. But please, let's have input if anyone has any other concerns about this statement.
And the goal is to have the everyone bolded. That was a very specific request there, so it's to stand out.
I noticed that, Lisa, I noticed that, and I thought that that was a really good touch, especially if it's a written statement. And I liked the first one. I thought it was, good and very rich. But if it's going to be, posted behind, like if you installed it, like sometimes they do at university buildings, you get to pay per letter for everything that gets put behind there. It's like, you want it to be concise and respectful, but also brief. So I thought that this really hit the mark. So I think it's well done.
You could also see it on buttons, little buttons that people would wear under their badge or something, or t-shirts.
I like that idea, Carla. Anybody else have any comments about this? Do I have a motion to accept this customer service statement for the library system?
I move that we accept this customer service statement for the library system.
Thank you, Lisa. Again, I will take this as a group vote. So all in favor, aye.
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 Is there anyone opposed? Thank you. Great job.
Special thanks to Brittany Eversberg and the Customer Service Committee for working on that for a long time now, and you know, in disjointed times and trying to pull this together. They did a really great job.
Good enough. Okay, any updates on the budget, upcoming budget?
Yeah, thank you, Marcy. So no changes in the budget since you all adopted it, and I very shortly afterwards sent you the change credit for the over 5% carryover. So that is on the posted website, which the posted proposed budget, which is up on JMRL's website currently. I did want to mention, when Marcy and I were talking about this, we thought it was important to mention that the COVID costs from the Q4 of last fiscal year and the first quarter of this fiscal year are over $50,000 and counting for JMRL. That's in terms of the materials mostly. So cleaning supplies, masks, you know, materials like the used to be called sneeze guards, but everyone's familiar with the plastic barriers, signage, stickers, all those. So unexpected costs in that arena, both last fiscal year and this fiscal year. And also the fact that Tony asked a question when he was first appointed to the board about if we're not collecting, the library is not collecting fines and fees, how's that affecting the equipment budget? Well, the answer is that no revenue effectively is coming into the equipment fund right now. So when the monthly reports get put up, you can see where the equipment fund was at the end of last fiscal year, which was fairly healthy, and where it's projected to be at the end of this year. But as I mentioned last month, JMRL has not bought any of the equipment that made it into this year's budget, except for COVID-related expenses, basically, in the first 6 months of this fiscal year. We'll be looking at it, Jerry and I, in January to see basically what balance we can make to get the things that branches need. And some of those needs have changed because they asked for equipment in the spring of last year, and things have changed dramatically since then.
Do you think it's important that the localities know about this expense? I mean, I think they know in the back of their head that, oh yes, everybody's spending money on COVID prep and supplies. But the difference is that, I mean, maybe I'm misunderstanding, but CARES funding is not going to the library to help pay for this the way it might be for like another nonprofit or a government agency or something like that. And so I just think it's really important when you're talking to, you know, the locality funders, that they understand that this is a big expense and that the library is covering it.
I absolutely agree. Now, our regional partners have been very proactive about providing service from their own CARES funding. So, you know, working on buildings, working on HVAC systems and things like that. But that doesn't include the money that I just mentioned, which is what JMRL has put out of pocket. And that's a great point, Carla. Thank you. So to talk about that credit, just to make sure we're all clear on that and make sure there are no questions here. The bottom line is that last year, because we had a hiring freeze basically from March and through June, there were open positions and some money accumulated there that was over what JMRL is allowed to carry over. Very wisely, JMRL's regional agreement caps annual general fund carryover at 5% of operating costs. So there can't be just money piling up. It has to be spent. That's not a problem most years. JMRL budget's pretty close and we're pretty thrifty with money. But last year there were some salary savings at the end of the year. So a little under $50,000 is going to be returned to our jurisdictions. And that gets broken down into a credit for each of them next year as per the percentage that they pay. So Albemarle gets the largest chunk back, Charlottesville next, then Greene, Louisa, Nelson down the line. I, you know, since that was an email, I wanted to make sure we had a chance to discuss that in public meeting if anybody had any questions. Okay. So annually before January 15th, myself and trustees, as are available, meet with representatives of our local jurisdictions to present the budget. We actually, by posting it and emailing it out to them, we have met that obligation, but it's good to meet in person or virtually in order to talk about what the library's projected needs are for next fiscal year. 2 of those 5 meetings are done. Albemarle's is scheduled for next week. Green and Nelson's are still to schedule. Louisa was very supportive, understood JMRL's request, appreciated the fact that JMRL has tried to keep costs very on level moving into next fiscal year. They were supportive of a 2% raise for staff, understanding that staff did not get one next year, but it entirely depends on what their revenue looks like for next year. They would like to support that if they can financially, is the word that the county gave. The meeting with Charlottesville was very honest. So Charlottesville, as you might have seen in the news, is having some issues with the meals and lodging tax. Nobody expected this pandemic to go so long. So the revenue that has come in is below what they were projecting for this current fiscal year. So their meeting ends the best that they can right now. And as they think about next year, they're really looking for flat funding from most of their departments and agency partners. We spoke to them at length, and they understood that the only real difference that JMRL is asking for, they understand that the retirement costs went up because they use the same retirement system and they give us those numbers. So that's a cost that we cannot negotiate. It has to be paid. They understand the same for the raise in minimum wage. It's going to happen halfway through next year. It's the 2% raise that is going to be the difference in Charlottesville's budget between this year and next year for JMRL. Staff was very supportive of a 2% raise. They understood that JMRL is not where it needs to be in terms of salaries, especially at the lower end, and especially when Charlottesville has made great strides there in the past few years. They are supportive of that. They understand that a 2% raise is a way to help meet those goals in the long run. So there's a long road to go there. Thanks to Kathy and Carla for coming to that meeting and really voicing those needs. We will see where that turns out.
I think what's important is that, I mean, what we took away from it is, you know, we might be calling this a cost of living raise for our staff, but really what it's about is getting our staff up to a higher, you know, pay level. And when we're talking with localities like Charlottesville and Albemarle County, you know, sometimes they forget that we don't, you know, our base isn't $15 an hour. Our base isn't even $13 an hour. You know, so we have folks who are in the $10.50, $11 an hour. So I think if we phrase it differently than a cost of living and really look at it as a long-term goal to get people to where they need to be making, you know, a living wage, then hopefully they'll look at it in more positive light. I don't.
And the personnel committee has got some work to do this spring to come up with a plan for the next 3 to 5 years to meet the state's benchmarks for wages that that they have plotted out for the next 3 years with an option for 2 more years after that. So nothing has changed in the budget. This is going to be probably a long process. Some of the jurisdictions have delayed their budget process so that they can get the most up-to-date information about their revenues for next year. And you all will be hearing about it on a monthly basis between now and the end of June.
Thanks, David. Any other comments or questions? Okay, library director's report. Hello, David.
I apologize. I knew doing the CE and the budget and this, I knew it was going to be a lot of me talking. So just feel free to mute me if you need to and listen later because this is recorded and it will be posted. So I've got a lot to report on today. We're a little behind schedule for my evaluation because we got a late in the summer. We did it a bit later, but Marcy had asked me to report on my goals for next year to see where we are and if any changes needed to happen. So I included those in your packet and they are on the final page of the packet. 3 goals. The first and primary goal is to guide JMRL through the library's 5-tiered COVID-19 response plan. I'm very pleased with the COVID progress so far. The organization definitely has been very cautious, has been responsive to staff and public feedback, has worked with our jurisdictions to meet their individual needs. Who knows where we will be on this goal in the middle of next summer. I can't predict that. I wish I could. It depends on the pandemic, basically. But we will follow the slow and steady course that we've laid out so far. And hopefully we can get to the tail end of this at some point. As I mentioned earlier, JMRL has been able to provide pretty excellent service throughout all 3 phases of the response plan as we've worked our way back down. And the second goal was to work with the Board Policy Committee and JMRL's Equity Committee to craft an anti-racism policy for JMRL. So the Equity Committee will be taking this up this year. We'll borrow heavily from the anti-racism statement that I made in the summer, but need to research other organizations' policies to make sure that we're not just putting empty words out here. This committee has been a bit slowed by the pandemic, and the Policy Committee has not discussed this yet. So at this point, if one of these goals were to be revised, it might be still in the draft phase of a policy this summer, depending on how much work the Equity Committee can get done. I'm hoping this winter and spring that we will have a draft policy that will be prepared and ready for the Policy Committee, but there's still a lot of work to do here. And third, to update the staff training plan, which was a 5-year plan, goal 3, objective 5 for this year. The working draft of that is up and running. It was unveiled to all staff at JMRL's in-service day. So again, with your access to the staff intranet, you also have access to the videos from in-service day if you'd like to go see that, and the new training manual itself. I can't take credit for this. The subcommittee of the training committee worked very hard on this, and I think it's an excellent training manual at this point. So that goal actually is pretty much done. It just is a constantly moving target as we add training offerings.
Are there any questions for David about these goals?
Just a quick reminder for me of the process of when these goals are, I think we're in a mid-year review essentially of these goals. So the next set of goals is established when?
June.
So what I had asked David to do was to give us an update on the goals that he felt were the highest priority for the coming 6 months. In May, we'll have a review of his goals for next year. And then in June, we will have the director's review, just to remind everybody about what our schedule is for this. But I think it's really helpful for us to pause, especially this year, and do some revision in terms of what David expects of himself and the library and what we expect of David. So I really appreciate that work. Thanks, David.
I do just have a few quick other things to report on, all good news. I'm very pleased that JMRL is going to, or has already signed a memorandum of understanding with Albemarle County Public Schools on a parent resource collection, which had been housed at their offices in the county office building in downtown Charlottesville. Mostly it was housed by the Special Education Department of Albemarle County's public schools. But that collection has been inaccessible throughout the pandemic as access to that building has been limited. So they reached out to see how we could kind of share those resources and get them out to the public via JMRL services. And we ended up having a much deeper agreement here about how best to serve the community. Mostly they're books for children and their parents about all aspects of child development. So they range from fiction books for kids and adults to the nonfiction. The MOU ends up that the Albemarle County Public Schools are going to get an entirely new collection to be housed at JMRL. So we're not taking the old volumes that they had there. They're providing us with a curated list and funding to purchase items for this parent resource collection, which will be available to all of JMRL's patrons, housed throughout the Albemarle County branches, but available to check out anywhere. And ongoing support for up to $3,000 a year to refresh that collection and make sure it stays relevant in the years to come. So I'm very excited about that partnership and really want to thank Albemarle County Public Schools for making this happen. Second, next month, January, next week really, we'll officially begin the Centennial of Public Library Service in our community. So the first public library opened in 1921 in the McIntyre building. JMRL is working with the Albemarle-Charlottesville Historical Society to produce a semi-permanent display about JMRL's history on the third floor of the Central Library. And as you're all aware, I believe, we're also working with filmmaker Lorenzo Dickerson on a short film about the history of library service in the region here, tentatively called Free and Open. We hope to explore the growth of the institution locally and to confront and discuss the history of the segregationist past of the institution. Lorenzo and I are actually going to be featured discussing the Centennial and the work on his film in a virtual program hosted by the Albemarle Charlottesville Historical Society, Wednesday, January 27th at 6:30. I see one of our attendees today is Tom Chapman, the executive director there. So thank you, Tom, for inviting us. We're looking forward to it. Another reminder that JMRL is partnering with the university, amongst many other partners, on the book discussion of Where Do We Go From Here by Dr. Martin Luther King. You should each have a copy waiting for you at your branch. So if you haven't already gotten it, there is one available for the Jim, yours is at Green, Carla, yours is here at Central, Mike, yours is at Northside. Lisa, you already have yours, I believe. Thomas, yours should be at Scottsville. Marcy, yours should be at Nelson.
Got it.
If you have any trouble getting them, let me know. And as a reminder, the virtual discussion is on Monday, January 25th from 6 to 7. And lastly, I did want to mention a gift that's coming in to the endowment fund for the Scottsville Library. We have a patron in that area there who's making a very generous gift. That's the seed money of $10,000 in that fund, which currently has no money. As you remember, a few years ago, JMRL opened, not JMRL, the Friends opened up those funds to allow for each branch to start collecting for their long-term capital needs. And this is the first of such to the Scottsville Library. So we're very thrilled about that. And we'll be talking with that patron about ways to honor that gift.
That's wonderful.
Thanks. David, will you send us around a schedule for the 2 events that will be held?
Certainly, yep.
Thank you. Does anyone have any comments or questions for David's report? I think it's great to have all of these wonderful things happening in these distressing times. Thank you. Are there any other matters that any board members would like to raise before the end of this meeting? Concerns, comments? Are there any items that you would like to make sure are included on the agenda for the next meeting?
I'm hoping that the personnel committee will meet in mid-January so we could give a report at the January meeting.
Great, thanks, Carla. Unmute, David.
All right, there should be a potential vote on the gifts policy that Mike read
Yes,
earlier.
yes. Any other issues that should be on that agenda? Great. Thank you all. I hope that you have a happy, peaceful, and safe New Year. We'll all be thinking about David's going to be off for a few days. Katie's having surgery. So keep her in your thoughts. And David too.
Slow to respond for the rest of this week and potentially early into next week. I won't be in the office. I'm going to be doing some
Nursing.
caregiving, yes.
Do I have a motion to adjourn the meeting?
So moved.
Thanks, Thomas. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Anyone opposed? Thank you all. Have a good New Year.
Happy New
Thank you all very much. Happy New
everyone.
Year.
Happy New Year. Happy New Year. Thank you.
Year. Bye.